Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K Full Frame. Two popular cinema cameras from Blackmagic Design. Both produce wonderful images, spectacular colors. There are some similarities. There are definitely some differences. If you have the 6K Pro, should you get the full frame? Which one's the right one for you? Now, the first thing I can say is who these cameras aren't for. Both of them are designed for you to be behind the camera. Neither of these cameras have continual autofocus. The monitor does not flip out. It's not made to hold in your hand and walk around and vlog with. Let's look at the similarities between the two of these. First is the body design. They look the same, the function buttons built into the camera. The record is in the same place. There were some complaints at first from filmmakers who wanted a box camera. That doesn't bother me. I have a cage for these things. I like the grip, actually. I think it's a good grip, but I understand people want to move away from that DSLR look. One of my favorite functions of these cameras, the monitor and the menu that's built into the monitor. It's a 5-inch screen, tilts upward, it can tilt downward. The display is big enough that I don't ever need an external monitor. Bright enough, it gives me false color, it gives me focus peaking. The other function of the screen is that it's a full menu control. Anything you need to change in camera is built right into that screen's menu. You're going to need to change your shutter speed, you're going to need to change your ISO. It's just easier to access it right on screen and not have to dig into submenus. Both have a dual ISO of 400 and 3200. Although I will say on the full frame that I'm getting less noise when I'm using other ISOs. I find that with the 6K Pro, if I'm on 400 or 3200, I'm getting the best image. But if I go to 200 ISO, if I go to 1200 ISO, it's not as good. On this camera, it is. So both shoot in B-RAW, and with B-RAW, you have constant quality or constant bit rate. B-RAW is not exclusive to DaVinci Resolve. It will work in Final Cut and in Premiere Pro. They both can use the same accessories as far as cages, battery grips, EVFs. So anything that you bought for the 6K Pro, you'll be able to use on the full frame. The left-hand side of these cameras look exactly the same as far as inputs and outputs go. So you have a 1/4-inch stereo mini microphone jack input, headphone out, a full HDMI out, USB out that you can use on an SSD card. There's a plug for the 12-volt adapter. That adapter is exclusive to Blackmagic. It comes with the camera. And 2 mini XLR ins. In the audio menu, you can select phantom power, you can select the gain. I know most people prefer not to record onto the camera, but the settings that are built into this, I've gotten great audio. That's a feature that I like about these cameras, especially being a solo shooter. So now we get into the differences. And these differences aren't necessarily a pro or a con. It's going to depend on you and your personal application and your needs. Let's start with the first obvious difference is the sensor size. The Cinema 6K is a full frame sensor. The Pocket 6K Pro is a Super 35 sensor, which is considered crop. This doesn't mean that the image on this is not as good. I've been shooting crop sensor Super 35 with Blackmagic for almost 10 years. Take a look at some images that I shot on this crop sensor. Here's an image from a movie I did using a 14mm lens. So I was outside, I was able to step back far enough and get that wide field of view. Some people prefer the full frame, I get it, but it doesn't mean that this sensor isn't good. It doesn't mean you're not going to get a good image from it. Most of the Hollywood movies that you've seen were shot on the equivalent of a Super 35 sensor. Another difference is the lens mount. We have EF mount on the 6K Pro, L mount on the new 6K full frame. But L mount is the direction that a lot of cinema lenses are going to be moving in. And it's easy to convert EF to L. There's an adapter that you can buy for it. So there's one that's $30 that will just convert the lens mounts. Where you would need to upgrade to a different adapter, one that's going to be about $250 or more, is if it's autofocus and it has the f-stops, that you would control inside the camera, then you need a specific adapter for that to work. The next difference is built-in NDs. Neutral density, the 6K Pro has it, the full frame does not. Because of the flange distance being shortened, the L mount, there's no room for it. But for this, you can get the screw-on NDs. You can do a matte box with the variable ND built into it. I feel like a lot of filmmakers are shooting at 1.8 or 2 to get that depth of field blur. That's nice, but sometimes you don't need to go that low. I love shooting at 5.6 and even 8 when I'm outside, just to get enough of the scenery in focus. I use 5.6 a lot on interviews, and I understand there are times you need it because you don't want to put your shutter speed up so fast to compensate for that. The full frame only shoots B-RAW. The 6K Pro, you have the option of shooting both B-RAW and ProRes. If you need that for your workflow, where you're handing files to someone else, this will not do ProRes. It creates a proxy folder. However, those proxy files are 1080 and compressed H.264. It's for the sake of using DaVinci Resolve. It doesn't have to create the proxies automatically. The 6K full frame has an optical low pass filter built into it. And what that's going to do is it's going to cut down on the moire and aliasing and sort of that blurry look that you can get in certain patterns. It's also supposed to cut down on IR pollution. I haven't had a problem with that on the 6K Pro. The media card types are different on these two. The full frame will take CF Express. The 6K Pro will take CFast. There's an SD card reader in there. I've never used it. I think you get like 5 seconds of shooting time on it. If you're using it, that's great, God bless you. But let's get back to the cards. So as of now, a 1 terabyte CFast card will cost you about $500 or $600. Whereas a 1 terabyte CF Express is going to be closer to $199. Now that may not matter because I know a lot of people prefer to shoot on the T7 drive. It's cheaper, it's still 1 terabyte, so you're holding a lot of information on there. But there are also people who prefer to put an actual card in there that stays in place. That way you don't have to worry about the external drive coming loose. I haven't had that happen to me yet. It's also an open gate sensor. And what that means is the open gate is taller than most full frame sensors. You're getting more height. So it's almost like a 3:2 ratio that you're shooting at. You can crop that in for a 16:9, 2.4:1, 1.77. The problem is when you put it back into Resolve, you have to remember where you framed. What I prefer about the 6K DCI, when I drag that file into Resolve, the aspect ratio that I shot in comes up. There's no extra frame in there. It is what it is. When I'm on set, I spend a lot of time building the composition of the shot. Shooting open gate, it takes a little bit more adjusting on here. You have to line things up based on the aspect ratio that you're using. It's not only that it's an extra step, it's remembering how you framed things. Resolve does not allow you to just throw up a thirds grid easily so that you can recenter these things. If you're listening, that would be a nice feature to have. The other advantage with open gate is if you're going to be using anamorphic lenses, when you de-squeeze everything, you lose nothing. And last but not least, I know this is a sensitive issue for a lot of people out there, the vertical content. People say, oh, it's cinema, why are we shooting vertical? I get that argument. I understand that, I feel you, but at the same time, if you're doing this for a business, if you're doing this for yourself, so sure, you shoot landscape, but for promotional purposes, it is nice to have a YouTube short, an Instagram reel, a TikTok to help promote what you're doing. With open gate, you crop in, it's already there. When you do that on a 16:9, you're losing, a little bit more of the image. They both also will do the tilt. So you can tell it not to lock if you go vertically, and it'll change the sensor to shoot vertically. When it comes to off-speed frame rates, it gets a little complicated with these two cameras. And this is an instance where if you want to shoot 60, 100, 120, the 6K Pro is probably the better option for you. On the 6K Pro, you're shooting 50 at the highest 6K resolution and 60 from a 2.4:1 6K all the way down to 4K. Then to shoot 120 frames per second, you're shooting at 2.8K. In the 6K open gate and anamorphic, you're looking at a top 36 frames per second. 6K DCI, you're at 48 frames per second. To shoot at 60 frames per second, you're already cropping down to 2.4 to 1 6K. To do 100 frames per second, you're at 2K. And if you want to do 120 frames per second, HD. For the times where I needed slow motion, 50 has been fine. If I'm going to be shooting at 60 frames per second on this, and I'm going into that 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio, it's still full frame versus when this crops in. And that's where I feel like the crop sensor matters. So who are these cameras for? Which one should you get? I would say if you're doing a lot of run and gun, especially outside, maybe the 6K Pro is better for you because of the built-in NDs. I also feel like when you're outside, the crop sensor doesn't matter as much. I know there are situations where this isn't true, but you can always back up. That's typically the opposite problem when you're inside. You can't go past the wall to record. You're looking to open more in frame, and that's where the full frame would come in handy. The full frame would be better on the gimbal is, if you notice, the front of these, because of the shorter flange distance, there's not as much front weight on the full frame. I've never gotten rid of a camera that I had. I still have my Pentax K1000 from 1991. I still have my Canon 6D from 2012. I still shoot stills on the Canon 6D because it's a good camera. I still have the production 4K that I bought in 2014 or 2015. And I still shoot with that because it's amazing. I'm going with this camera. I'm also really impressed with the image quality of this. They both look amazing. Taking it out every day and shooting with it, I can see a difference in the image already. I can see a sharper image because I prefer to shoot interviews on a 50mm or an 85. I'll go as low as a 35, but I've been in situations where I've had to open up to 24 on this camera because the space was so tight, and I just wasn't happy with it. The other part of the work that I do is fictional narrative. So being able to put an anamorphic lens on here is something that does matter to me. There's no wrong choice between these two. The image that you can create with these is incredible. If you know what you're doing as far as setting your ISO, your shutter speed, and your f-stop, you're gonna get an image that is gonna blow everything else out of the water. And I don't mean to upset anyone who owns Canons or Sonys. My personal style of look is something that looks like real life. Maybe the colors are a little bit exaggerated. Not over-saturated, but they just jump out at you, they breathe, they look pleasant. And these cameras will give you that image almost right out of camera, without having to apply a LUT, without having to do much tweaking. If you want to put a yellow cast on your films, if you want a blue look to the image, you can also do that with these files. No camera is perfect. There's gonna be a flaw, there's gonna be something about any camera out there. Knowing what it is and knowing what the workaround is to that is what's going to make you the better filmmaker. Thank you so much again for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't, or at least like this video if you watched it and made it this far. It means a lot to me. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these cameras. And once again, everybody, thank you for watching. Peace. I have an idea. I wonder how this camera looks with this camera.